The maintenance corridor on level 7 smelled like burnt circuits and recycled air. David Reyes dragged his toolbox across the metal floor, feeling the vibrations through his boots. He couldn't hear the scraping sound it made, but he knew others complained about it. His supervisor had mentioned something last week, lips moving in that annoyed way that meant he was being too loud again. 3 years since the bombing. 3 years since silence became his constant companion. David touched the hearing aids tucked behind his ears, useless pieces of technology that only produced painful feedback in the electromagnetic soup of the space station. He'd stopped wearing them during work hours. The rehabilitation station housed over 2,000 beings from across the galaxy. Most were refugees, some were injured soldiers like he'd been, others were simply lost. David had taken the maintenance job because it required minimal communication. He fixed things. Things didn't judge him for being broken. His assignment today was checking the environmental systems in the restricted containment bays, the big ones, where they kept dangerous creatures that rescue teams had pulled from war zones. David had been working on the station for 8 months and never seen most of those creatures. The feeding systems were automated. The medical scans were done remotely. Nobody went into those bays unless absolutely necessary. Bay 12 was the largest. David checked his datapad. The note said a Draari had been living there for 2 years. Hostile and unresponsive, the file claimed. He scrolled through the reports. No successful communication attempts. Possible brain damage. Dangerous if approached. David entered the observation room and looked through the reinforced glass. His breath caught. She was massive, easily 20 feet tall even when hunched over. Her scales shifted between deep purple and midnight blue, catching the artificial light like oil on water. Wings folded against her back, too large for the space but carefully tucked to avoid the walls. 4 legs, 2 arms, clawed hands that could probably crush a shuttle. But that wasn't what caught his attention. It was her hands. The Draari was sitting against the far wall, moving her clawed fingers in deliberate patterns. Press against the wall, slide, tap twice, curve the palm, extend 3 fingers. Over and over. The same sequence. Not random scratching like the report suggested. Not nervous behavior. David's heart began to pound. He recognized structure. He recognized language. He set down his toolbox and watched. The creature repeated the pattern 15 times before stopping, then pressed her head against the wall. Her whole body sagged with what looked like exhaustion or defeat. David pulled up the medical files on his datapad. Draari biology. He scrolled through the anatomical diagrams. There, auditory processing organs located behind the cranial ridges. He zoomed in on the rescue photos from 2 years ago. The right side of her head was scarred, scales regrown in a mottled pattern that didn't match the rest of her body. Blast damage. He switched to the communication logs. Every test had been verbal. Neural translators required hearing to work. The standard protocols assumed auditory communication. Not once had anyone tried visual signals. David looked at the Draari again. She'd moved to a different wall and started the pattern over, slower this time, like she was tired of trying. His hands moved before he could think about it. He signed in American Sign Language even though she couldn't see him through the tinted observation glass. Hello? Can you understand me? Stupid, she was an alien. She wouldn't know ASL, but the structure, the deliberate movements, the repetition, it all screamed of someone trying to communicate through gesture. David made a decision that would probably get him fired. He opened his datapad and disabled the observation room's privacy tint. The glass cleared. The Draari's head snapped up. She stared directly at him. Her eyes were golden with vertical pupils. Intelligent eyes. Aware eyes. Not the dull gaze of someone with brain damage. David raised his hand slowly. He pointed to himself, then signed his name using the military shorthand he'd learned after losing his hearing. He fingerspelled it too. David. The Draari didn't move. She watched him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. He tried again, simpler this time. He pointed to himself and waved. Just hello. Just acknowledgement. The massive creature stood up slowly. She moved toward the glass with surprising grace for something so large. Each step was careful, controlled. She stopped 3 feet from the barrier and towered over him, even though he was standing on the elevated observation platform. Then she raised one clawed hand. She pointed to herself with one finger. Her other hand moved in a gesture that was definitely deliberate. Not ASL, but structured. Intentional. David's datapad buzzed. He glanced down. His supervisor was looking for him. He was supposed to be checking environmental systems, not staring at restricted specimens. He looked back up at the Draari. She was still holding the gesture, waiting. David made another decision. He pulled out his personal tablet, the one he used to take notes. He opened a text file and typed, "Can you see this?" He turned the screen to face the glass. The Draari leaned forward. Her eyes moved across the screen. Then she did something that made David's breath stop. She nodded. Not the way humans nodded, but close enough. A deliberate up and down motion of her massive head. David typed again, "You cannot hear." The Draari's whole body seemed to slump. She shook her head. Then she raised both hands and made a complex gesture. It was elegant despite the size of her claws. It was communication. David typed, "I cannot hear either. They think I am broken, but I understand you are not." The Draari stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she pressed one clawed hand against the glass. Her hand was shaking. David pressed his own hand against the glass from his side. Even through the barrier, even across species, the gesture was universal. "You are not alone." The Draari pulled her hand back and began to sign rapidly. David couldn't understand the gestures yet, but he recognized desperation. He recognized someone who had been trying to speak for so long that hope had become pain. She kept signing faster and faster and then suddenly stopped. She made one final gesture. Her hand extended, palm up. The claws curled inward except for one. It pointed at David, then swept to the side, then pointed down. Help. Even across alien biology and different languages, that gesture was clear. David nodded. He typed, "I will help you, I promise." His datapad buzzed again. Angry messages from his supervisor. He would deal with that later. The Draari pressed her head against the glass. Her eyes closed. For the first time in 2 years, someone had understood. For the first time since the explosion that took her hearing, someone had seen her. David picked up his tablet and started recording everything. The gestures, the patterns, the sequences. If she had language, he would learn it. If the station had overlooked her because she couldn't hear, he would make them see the truth. He was a maintenance technician who couldn't hear. She was a Draari who couldn't hear. Together, they would make the galaxy listen. David returned to Bay 12 every day for a week. His supervisor had written him up twice for neglecting other duties, but he didn't care. Every evening after his official shift ended, he came back with his tablet and his determination. The Draari waited for him. She'd started positioning herself near the observation window during the hours he usually arrived. On the third day, she was already there when he walked in. Communication came slowly. David would sign something in ASL, then try to act it out. The Draari would watch carefully, then respond with her own gesture language. They built a vocabulary word by word. Hello? Yes. No. Wait. Thank you. By the 5th day, David had recorded over 200 distinct gestures. The Draari's language was complex, using not just hand shapes but positions relative to the body. High gestures near the head meant questions. Low gestures near the chest meant statements. Sweeping motions indicated past events. Sharp, quick movements meant urgency. She learned ASL faster than he learned her language. Her claws made some signs difficult, but she adapted. She would curve her fingers differently or use her whole hand where humans used fingertips. On the 7th day, David brought a bigger screen. He'd borrowed a display tablet from the equipment locker, the kind used for technical presentations. He typed a question he'd been building up courage to ask. "What is your name?" The Draari looked at the screen for a long time. Then she made a gesture that was beautiful and complex. It started at her throat, moved upward in a spiral, and ended with her claws spread wide like wings catching wind. David tried to copy it. His human hands couldn't quite match the elegance, but he tried. The Draari made a sound. Not words, but a rumbling that came from deep in her chest. David felt the vibration through the floor. She was laughing, actually laughing at his clumsy attempt. She repeated the gesture slowly, helping him learn. Then she pointed at the screen. David understood. He typed, "I need to give you a name in Earth language. Can I call you Silara?" It was close to the shape of her gesture, the sweeping motion that suggested soaring. She nodded. Then she pointed at him and made a question gesture. David signed his name again, then typed it. She practiced signing it until she could do it smoothly. Then she made a new gesture, one he hadn't seen before. It was gentle, curved protectively. Friend. David felt something tight in his chest loosen. He signed back, yes, friend. That night, David stayed later than usual. He'd brought food from the station cafeteria and ate while they communicated. Silara watched him eat with curiosity. He typed, "What do you eat?" She made a disgusted gesture at the feeding port in her bay. The automated system delivered nutrient paste 3 times a day. It kept her alive, but clearly wasn't pleasant. David made a note. He'd look into Draari dietary needs. Then Silara did something unexpected. She moved away from the window and gestured for him to wait. She went to the far corner of her bay and began signing rapidly, not to him but to herself, or maybe to someone who wasn't there. When she came back, her movements were slower, heavier. David typed, "Are you okay?" Silara made a gesture he hadn't seen before. It took him a moment to understand. Sad. She was sad. He typed, "Why?" What followed took over an hour. Silara signed her story in pieces and David recorded everything. He didn't understand all of it yet, but he understood enough. She'd been a guardian. The gesture for it was protective, encompassing. She'd lived on a colony world. Others of her kind were there. She'd protected them. Then came the gesture for violence, for explosion, for pain. She touched the scarred side of her head. Before she signed, I could hear. After, nothing. David typed, "I understand, bomb, explosion, me too." He pointed to his ears. Silara moved closer to the glass. She made the gesture for friend again, more emphatic. She continued her story. After the explosion, she'd fought. The gesture for it was fierce. She'd protected others while they escaped. But when rescue came, she couldn't hear their calls, couldn't hear their instructions. They thought she was in shock. They tranquilized her and brought her here. And then nothing. 2 years of nothing. People came to the observation window sometimes. Their mouths moved. Sounds must have happened. But Silara heard none of it and they never tried anything else. She'd tried signing through the glass. She'd tried making gestures at the automated cameras. She'd tried everything she could think of. Nobody understood. David's hands were shaking when he typed, "I am sorry. They should have tried harder." Silara made a gesture that meant acceptance. Past. Cannot change. Then she made a new gesture. This one was urgent, desperate. She repeated it 3 times. David didn't understand. He made the question gesture. Silara moved to the wall and began drawing with her claw, scratching shapes into the metal. She'd done this before, he realized. The walls were covered in scratch marks that maintenance reports had called random damage. But they weren't random. They were pictures. She drew a building. Then she drew symbols he didn't recognize. Then she drew small oval shapes, 7 of them. She pointed to the ovals and made a gesture at chest height. Small. Then she made a protective gesture over them. David's blood went cold. He typed, "Eggs, children?" Silara's whole body trembled. She nodded frantically. She pointed to the drawing of the building, then made gestures indicating underground. Hidden. Safe place. She'd been trying to tell them for 2 years. She'd been signing it, drawing it, acting it out. And nobody had understood. David typed, "Where?" Silara went back to the wall. She drew more. A planet, a colony. She made gestures indicating time. Before explosion. Before rescue. Before she came here. She'd hidden the eggs in the chaos, put them somewhere safe. And then she'd been taken away, unable to tell anyone, unable to make them understand that she'd left children behind. David typed, "How long can eggs survive?" Silara made a gesture he'd learned meant uncertainty. Then she made one that clearly meant running out. Time running out, David stood up. He typed, "I will make them listen, I promise." Silara pressed both hands against the glass. The desperate hope in her golden eyes was painful to see. David grabbed his tablet and recordings. He had 7 days' worth of evidence. Video of their communication. Proof that Silara was intelligent, aware, and desperately trying to tell them something important. He headed for the administrative offices. Director Patricia Williams worked late most nights. If he could just make her watch the videos, make her understand what they'd missed. Behind him, through the glass, Silara signed the same gesture over and over. Please, 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 her children were waiting. And time was running out. Director Patricia Williams sat behind her desk with her arms crossed. She'd been watching David's videos for 20 minutes without saying a word. Her office was small and crowded with screens showing different parts of the station. One of them displayed Bay 12, where Silara paced anxiously. Finally, Patricia stopped the video and looked up at David. "This is why you've been ignoring your other assignments." David had his tablet ready. He typed quickly. "She has been trying to tell someone for 2 years. She has children left behind." Patricia rubbed her temples. "David, I appreciate what you've done here, really, but you're asking me to authorize a rescue mission to a quarantined world based on gestures from a creature we've classified as potentially dangerous." David typed faster. "She is not dangerous. She is deaf like me. Everyone assumed she was broken because she could not hear." "I understand that," Patricia said, "and what you've accomplished with her is remarkable. But there are protocols, costs. The planet she came from is scheduled for resource processing in 3 weeks. The whole colony was evacuated. There's radiation, structural damage." David showed her another video. Silara drawing the location over and over, signing the same desperate message. Patricia watched silently. Then she sighed. "If I authorize this, it's a small team. Minimal resources. And if we don't find anything, that's the end of it. Understood?" David nodded so hard his neck hurt. "Fine," Patricia said. "I'll put together a team. But David, you need to understand something. Those eggs, if they exist, have been without care for 2 years. The chances they're still viable are almost zero." David typed. "Then we tell her the truth. Better than leaving her hoping forever." Patricia looked at him for a long moment. "You really can't hear me at all, can you? The station gossip says you're faking it for attention." David felt his face get hot. He typed, "Bomb took my hearing. Some people do not believe disabilities they cannot see." "I believe you," Patricia said quietly. "And I'm sorry people are stupid." She stood up. "I'll authorize the mission. We leave in 2 days. You're coming with us. She trusts you, and we'll need that trust to get accurate location information." David left the director's office feeling like he might float away. He ran back to Bay 12. Silara was pressed against the observation window, waiting. He typed, "They said yes. We go to find your children." Silara's whole body sagged with relief. Then she began signing frantically, giving him details. Underground, 3 levels down, past the water processing center, through the old storage tunnels, left at the junction where the ceiling collapsed. The chamber with the reinforced door that only opened from the inside. David recorded everything. Every gesture, every detail. He'd make sure they found the right place. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Silara's desperate hope, about the possibility that the eggs were already dead, about having to tell her they'd failed. 2 days later, David stood in the shuttle bay with the rescue team. Dr. Rachel Foster was there, a xenobiologist who specialized in reproduction systems. She was young and enthusiastic, talking rapidly about Draari egg development. Lieutenant Omar Singh handled security, a tall man with dark skin and watchful eyes. The pilot was a woman named Anne Brooks who looked barely old enough to fly. Patricia came to see them off. "The planet is not friendly," she reminded them. "Radiation levels are manageable with suits, but barely. Structures are unstable. You have 6 hours before we pull you out regardless of what you've found. Understood?" Everyone nodded. David went to Bay 12 one last time. Silara was waiting. He typed, "We leave now. I will find them, I promise." Silara made a gesture that was part gratitude, part prayer. Then she signed something new. It took David a moment to understand. "Be careful, small friend." The shuttle ride took 4 hours. David spent most of it reviewing Silara's directions with Dr. Foster. Anne called out warnings about radiation spikes that nobody could do anything about. Omar checked and rechecked their equipment. The colony world looked dead. Blast craters marked the landscape. Buildings stood like broken teeth against a gray sky. The settlement had housed 3,000 beings once. Now it was a graveyard. They landed near what had been the central district. Silara's directions started from there. David led the way, following the map she'd drawn in his mind through gestures. The building she'd described was half collapsed. They had to clear debris to get inside. Omar went first, checking for structural dangers. The stairs going down were intact but dark. 3 levels, Dr. Foster read from David's notes. Past water processing. The lower levels smelled like stale air and rust. Their suit lights cut through the darkness. David felt vibrations through the floor, the building settling on its damaged supports. Water processing was flooded. They waded through ankle-deep water, cold even through the suits. Past that was a tunnel. Left at the collapsed ceiling, just like Silara had described. "I'll be damned," Omar said. She was right about everything so far. The chamber door was exactly where Silara had signed it would be. Heavy metal sealed tight. Built to protect something valuable, Omar examined it. "It's locked from inside. We'd need to cut through, and that might damage whatever's in there." David thought for a moment. Then he knocked on the door. 3 times, hard enough to feel through his gloves. "What are you doing?" Dr. Foster asked. David knocked again. Rhythm mattered. Pattern mattered. If there was life inside, if there was awareness, vibration might reach it where sound could not. He knocked a 3rd time. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then David felt it. A vibration answering back, weak but deliberate, 3 pulses. "Something's alive in there," Omar said, checking his scanner. "Multiple somethings. Faint biosigns." Dr. Foster moved forward with specialized equipment. "Stand back. If those are eggs, we need to be careful. They're probably in some kind of stasis, but opening the door wrong could kill them." It took 30 minutes to safely bypass the door's lock. David counted every second. Finally, the door slid open with a grinding sound he felt but couldn't hear. Inside the chamber, emergency lights flickered on. 7 stasis pods lined the walls. Each contained a Draari egg, slightly larger than David's torso. Status lights blinked red. "Critical power. Systems failing. They're alive," Dr. Foster whispered. "All 7. But barely. We need to move them now." The team worked fast. Each egg had to be carefully disconnected from the failing stasis system and transferred to portable units they'd brought. David helped carry them, cradling each one like it was made of glass. The smallest egg was cool to the touch even through his gloves. He felt a faint vibration inside it, a heartbeat maybe, or something like it. Silara's children, still fighting, still waiting for their mother after 2 years. "We've got them all," Omar said. "Let's get out of here before this place comes down." They made it back to the shuttle with 20 minutes to spare. Anne took off fast, racing away from the dying planet. Dr. Foster monitored the eggs constantly, adjusting the portable stasis fields. "They're stabilizing," she said, "but they need proper care immediately. And they need their mother. My scans show they're designed for specific biofeedback. Without the mother's presence, they won't develop properly even if we keep them alive." David closed his eyes and leaned back in his seat. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd found them. Now they just had to get them home to Silara. The shuttle docked with the station 4 hours later. Medical teams were waiting. David watched them carefully transfer the eggs to the medical bay. Then he ran to Bay 12. Silara was frantic. She'd been pacing for hours, Private Anne had told him. The young pilot had learned a few signs and tried to keep Silara updated, but it hadn't helped much. David burst into the observation room and held up 7 fingers. Silara froze. Then she made the question gesture, her whole body tense. David signed, "Alive, all alive, coming here now." Silara roared. David felt the vibration shake the observation window. She pressed both hands against the glass, then her whole body against it. The containment field sparked. Alarms blared. David felt them through the floor. Silara wasn't attacking. She was desperate. She needed to reach her children. David ran for the door, heading to find Director Williams. They had to let her out. The eggs needed their mother. Behind him, Silara tore through the containment field like it was paper. Security personnel poured into the corridor outside Bay 12. They carried restraint weapons and shock batons. Silara had broken through the containment field and was heading for the medical bay. The station's automated systems tracked her movement through the corridors. David ran faster than he'd ever run before. He had to reach the medical bay before security did something stupid, before they hurt Silara when all she wanted was to reach her children. He burst through the medical bay doors. Dr. Foster looked up from the incubation units where the 7 eggs rested. "David, what's happening?" "The alarms." David pulled out his tablet, but his hands were shaking too much to type. He just pointed at the eggs and made Silara's protective gesture. "The mother," Dr. Foster understood. "She's coming." The doors exploded inward. Silara filled the entrance, too large for the human-sized doorway. She'd torn it wider. Security personnel shouted behind her, but she ignored them. Her golden eyes locked onto the incubation units. She moved forward, and David saw something he'd never seen before. Silara was crying. Tears ran down her scaled face as she approached the eggs. "Everyone stand down." Patricia Williams' voice came through the intercom. "Do not fire. Repeat, do not fire." Security backed off but kept their weapons ready. Silara didn't notice them at all. She reached the first incubation unit with trembling claws. Dr. Foster stepped forward carefully. "The units need to stay closed for now. The eggs are stable but fragile." David signed to Silara. "Careful. They are weak. They need gentle care." Silara nodded. She pressed one claw gently against the transparent surface of the first unit. Inside, the egg rocked slightly. Then it rocked again, more deliberately. "It's responding to her," Dr. Foster said, checking her instruments. "The biofeedback. The egg knows its mother is here." Silara moved to each unit in turn. Each egg responded the same way. Small movements. Vibrations David could feel through the floor. They knew she was there. When Silara reached the last unit, she stopped. This egg was smaller than the others, and its readings were weaker. She made a gesture David recognized. Concern. Worry. Dr. Foster checked the readings. "This one is struggling. Even with the stasis field, it's not developing properly." Silara made several rapid signs. David understood most of them. This egg was special. Different, like her. Deaf? David signed the question. Silara nodded. She made more gestures. The egg was deaf like she was. It needed different care. Specific vibrations. Particular temperatures. Things the automated systems couldn't provide. David typed for Dr. Foster. "She says it needs special care. She knows what to do." "Then we need to let her do it," Dr. Foster said. She looked at Patricia, who had arrived in the doorway. "Director, these eggs need their mother. My equipment can keep them alive, but they won't thrive. Look at the readings. Every time she touches a unit, the egg's vitals improve." Patricia looked at the security team, then at Silara, then at the eggs. "If we let her access them and something goes wrong, then we'll have tried," Dr. Foster said. "Right now, we're watching them slowly die. She might be able to save them." Patricia made a decision. "Open the units. But slowly. Monitor everything." Dr. Foster began the careful process of opening the first incubation unit. The moment the seal broke, Silara's whole posture changed. She leaned over the egg and began making low, rumbling sounds David felt through the floor. Her body temperature increased. David could feel the heat radiating from her. She carefully wrapped her claws around the egg and lifted it. For something so large and dangerous looking, her touch was incredibly gentle. She held the egg against her chest and the rumbling intensified. "Her body is providing exactly the right frequency of vibration," Dr. Foster said, amazed. "And the temperature regulation is perfect. She's doing what our machines tried to do, but better." Silara positioned the egg carefully, then looked at the next unit. Dr. Foster opened it. Silara somehow managed to hold 2 eggs, adjusting her position to give each one the right contact. By the time all 7 eggs were free, Silara had arranged them around her body in a complex pattern. Each egg touched her scales at specific points. The rumblings she produced varied in frequency, different for each egg. The smallest one, Dr. Foster pointed. "It's responding. Look at the vitals." The deaf egg pressed against Silara's chest where the vibrations were strongest was showing improvement. Its color deepened. Its temperature stabilized. She knew, Dr. Foster said. She knew exactly what it needed. David typed, "She is the mother." Of course she knew. Patricia ordered the medical bay cleared of non-essential personnel. They set up monitoring equipment but gave Silara space. She settled into a corner, her body curved protectively around the eggs. Private Ann Brooks approached carefully with a tablet. She'd been learning sign language from David. She signed slowly to Silara. "Do you need anything?" Silara looked surprised, then pleased. She made a few gestures. Ann looked at David for help. He translated, "She needs food. Real food, not the nutrient paste. And water. And she needs to know the room temperature." They brought her fresh meat that the station kept for carnivorous species. Silara ate quickly, never moving in a way that disturbed the eggs. She drank 2 large containers of water. Then she settled back into position and continued the rumbling. David stayed in the medical bay for hours watching. Other staff members came and went. Some were curious, some were skeptical, but everyone could see the eggs improving. Around midnight, Patricia brought David a meal. She'd learned a few signs too. She signed, "You saved them." David signed back, "Silara saved them, I just listened." "You did more than listen," Patricia said. "You saw her when everyone else looked away." 3 days passed. Silara never left the eggs except for brief moments to eat or drink. Anne and David took turns staying with her, learning more of her language. Other station personnel started visiting, watching the unusual family. On the 4th day, the smallest egg cracked. Silara's whole body tensed. She adjusted her position, giving the egg more room while maintaining contact. The crack widened. A small claw emerged, then a snout. David felt his heart pounding. Dr. Foster recorded everything, her hands shaking with excitement. The baby Draari emerged slowly. It was about the size of a large dog, with soft purple scales and wings too small to fly. It made small chirping sounds and opened its eyes. Those eyes found Silara immediately. The baby crawled toward her, clumsy and determined. Silara made gentle rumbling sounds and pulled the baby close. She positioned it carefully and then looked at David. She made a sign he'd learned. This one, special, David understood. He signed, "Deaf like you?" Silara nodded. The baby couldn't hear its mother's rumbling, but it could feel the vibrations. That was enough. Over the next 2 days, 3 more eggs hatched. Each baby was healthy and hungry. Silara cared for all of them with patient attention, while still protecting the 3 remaining eggs. The station transformed around them. Personnel who'd never cared about the creatures in containment now stopped by regularly. Anne organized a group to learn sign language. Someone donated soft materials for nesting. Others brought better food. The medical bay became a gathering place. People wanted to see the mother and her babies. They wanted to understand. On the 7th day, the last 3 eggs hatched within hours of each other. One of them was also deaf. Silara had known. She'd been giving it extra attention the whole time. 7 healthy babies, 2 deaf, 5 hearing, all alive because their mother never stopped trying to tell someone they existed. Patricia came to see them that evening. She watched Silara carefully managing all 7 babies, keeping them fed, warm, and safe. She signed to David, "What happens now?" David had been thinking about that. He typed, "She cannot stay in a bay. They need space. They need home." Patricia nodded slowly. "I've been contacted by several parties. The Draari homeworld wants them back. The Galactic Council wants to relocate them to a protected habitat. Even Earth has expressed interest in offering sanctuary. She should choose," David typed. "Yes," Patricia agreed. "She should." That night, David asked Silara what she wanted. She thought for a long time, watching her babies play and tumble around her. Then she began to sign. She told him about the Draari homeworld, how they'd cast her out for being deaf, how they'd called her broken and worthless, how they'd said she could never have children of her own because she'd be unable to care for them properly. These eggs, she signed, were abandoned by others, left behind because no one thought they would survive. No one thought they mattered. She looked at David. "We are the same, you and I. The overlooked ones, the ones they said were broken." David felt tears on his face. Silara continued, "I do not want to go back to those who rejected me. I want to stay where someone finally understood." Where being different was not wrong. David typed the message for Patricia. The director read it and nodded. "Then we'll make a place for you here, all of you." But Silara wasn't finished signing. She had one more request. "I want to help others like us," she signed. "The ones no one hears, the ones everyone overlooks. Let me be useful. Let me protect them." "A guardian," Patricia said. "That's what you were on the colony." Silara nodded. "Then that's what you'll be here," Patricia decided. "Guardian of Station Omega-7, for all species, for all abilities." Silara made the sign for gratitude. Then she made the sign for family, encompassing David in the gesture. David signed back, family. 3 weeks after the last egg hatched, the Draari delegation arrived. 5 of them, massive and imposing with scales that shone like polished metal. They demanded to see Silara and the hatchlings immediately. Patricia met them in the conference room first. David stood beside her, ready to translate. The leader of the delegation was named Corvin, and he made it clear through the neural translator that he was not happy. "The hatchlings belong with their own kind. Corvin announced. We have proper facilities. Proper education. They cannot be raised by humans who know nothing of Draari culture. Patricia kept her voice level. Silara was rescued from a destroyed colony over 2 years ago. Your government was notified. No one came for her. Because we were told she was damaged, Corvin said dismissively. Mentally impaired. Not worth the resources to retrieve. David's hands clenched into fists. He typed on his tablet, she is deaf, not damaged. Corvin barely glanced at the screen. Same thing for Draari. Those who cannot hear cannot fight, cannot serve, cannot contribute to society in meaningful ways. The other delegates nodded in agreement. One of them added, we are a warrior people. The weak do not survive. David typed furiously. She fought to save others. She protected an entire colony while evacuation happened. She is stronger than all of you. Corvin finally looked at David directly. You are the deaf human who found her. Patricia mentioned you. How curious that broken things find each other. Patricia stood up sharply. That's enough. You will show respect in my station. We will take Silara and the hatchlings back to the homeworld, Corvin said. This is not negotiable. They are Draari. They belong with us. Let's ask Silara what she wants, Patricia suggested. The delegation was led to the newly constructed habitat bay. It was 10 times the size of the old containment area, with proper temperature controls, nesting areas, and space for the hatchlings to play and learn. Silara was in the center of the bay with her 7 children. The hatchlings had grown noticeably in 3 weeks. They were more coordinated now, able to glide short distances. 3 of them were wrestling playfully while 2 others practiced hunting with targets Anne had made. The 2 deaf hatchlings stayed close to Silara, learning through vibration and touch. Corvin and his delegation entered the bay. The hatchlings immediately stopped playing and moved behind their mother. Silara positioned herself between her children and the strangers, her body language clearly protective. Corvin spoke, his voice booming through the neural translator. I am Corvin, High Commander of the Draari Defense Force. We have come to take you home. Silara didn't respond. She couldn't hear him. David entered the bay and moved to where Silara could see him. He signed. These Draari say they want to take you and children to homeworld. Silara's eyes narrowed. She signed back rapidly. David translated for Corvin. She says you abandoned her. You were told she was here and you never came. We were told she was useless, Corvin said. Clearly that information was incorrect. But she and the hatchlings are still Draari. They belong with their own kind. David signed the message. Silara's response was longer this time. She says she was born on the homeworld. David translated. She was cast out at age 15 when illness took her hearing. She was told she had no value. She was told she would never be allowed to have children because she couldn't care for them. She was told she was better off dead. Corvin shifted uncomfortably. That was a long time ago. Attitudes have changed. Silara signed again, her movements sharp with anger. She says 2 of her children are deaf like her, David continued. She asks what you would do with them. Would you cast them out too? Tell them they have no value? We would train them, Corvin said. Give them roles suitable for their limitations. One of the deaf hatchlings, the smallest one Silara had named Whisper, moved forward. The baby looked at Corvin and made a gesture. It was clumsy but recognizable. No. The deaf one can sign, one of the delegates said, surprised. Of course she can, David typed. She's intelligent. She just communicates differently. Whisper returned to her mother's side. Silara wrapped a protective wing around her. David signed to Silara. What do you want? Silara's response was clear and firm. She signed it slowly so everyone could see, even though only David understood. She says she will not go back to a place that rejected her for being different. David translated. She will not raise her children in a society that judges worth by hearing. She chooses to stay here. That is unacceptable, Corvin said. I have authority from the Draari Council to take them. Patricia stepped forward. And I have authority from the Galactic Rehabilitation Commission to protect refugees who fear persecution. Silara has expressed that she was exiled from your world because of disability. That constitutes persecution under galactic law. She is being influenced by humans, another delegate argued. She does not understand what is best for her children. David felt rage building in his chest. He typed, She understands perfectly. You are the ones who do not listen. Silara signed something else. David almost smiled when he translated it. She says if you truly cared about Draari children, you would have come looking for these 7. They were abandoned on the colony. Left behind when everyone evacuated, she found them and protected them because no one else did. Where were you then? The delegation had no answer for that. She also says, David continued, that she has been offered citizenship by Earth, protection for her and all her children, equal rights regardless of ability. She accepts that offer. Corvin's face darkened. Earth? You would choose humans over your own species. Silara signed one final message. David translated it carefully. She says you stopped being her species when you told her she had no value. These humans saw her worth when you did not. That makes them more family than you ever were. The delegation left in anger. They threatened legal action and political consequences. Patricia handled it calmly, citing treaty after treaty, law after law. The Galactic Council would review the case, but Patricia was confident Silara's right to choose would be upheld. That evening, David sat with Silara and her children. Anne was there too, practicing her signs with the hatchlings. The 5 hearing babies were learning both vocal and visual communication. The 2 deaf ones were thriving with sign language. Silara signed to David, "Thank you for giving me voice." David signed back, "You always had a voice. I just helped others hear it." The smallest hatchling, Whisper, climbed into David's lap. She was growing fast but still small enough to curl up against him. She made the rumbling sound that deaf Draari used to communicate through vibration. David felt it through his whole body. It was the Draari equivalent of a purr, contentment, safety, love. Anne signed to Silara, "What will you do now?" Silara thought about it. Then she signed, "Help others like me. Others who cannot speak the way most do. Others who are overlooked. The station gets beings from all over the galaxy," Patricia said, joining them. "Many with communication difficulties. Many who have been labeled as damaged or difficult. If you're willing, we could use someone with your experience." Silara signed, "I am willing." Over the next month, word spread about the deaf Draari and the human who translated for her. Other stations started sending their difficult cases to Omega-7, a Talarian who communicated through scent patterns that no one had equipment to detect, a Vryn who used color changes instead of sound, a human child who had been born without vocal cords and whose parents had been told she'd never truly communicate. Silara met with each one. She couldn't always communicate with them directly, but she understood isolation. She understood being dismissed. And somehow that understanding helped. David worked with her developing new translation methods. Anne organized training sessions for station personnel. Dr. Foster studied the various communication methods and published papers that changed how the medical community approached nonverbal beings. The 7 hatchlings grew stronger every day. They became ambassadors in their own way, showing that different abilities were not lesser abilities. The 2 deaf ones, Whisper and Storm, were particularly close to David. They followed him around the station, learning signs and making friends with other nonverbal beings. One day, a ship arrived carrying representatives from Earth's government. They brought formal documentation, citizenship papers for Silara, and all 7 children, protection status, rights and responsibilities. The representative, a kind older woman named Ambassador Helen Price, signed as she spoke. She'd learned specifically for this meeting. "Earth is honored to welcome you," she signed and said. "We believe diversity makes us stronger. Different perspectives, different abilities, different ways of understanding the world. These are gifts, not burdens." Silara signed, "Thank you for seeing value where others saw none. Thank you for showing us there are more ways to be heard than just speaking." Helen responded. That night, there was a celebration in the habitat bay. Beings from across the station came to honor Silara and her family. They brought food, gifts, and stories. Many shared their own experiences of being overlooked or dismissed. David watched it all and felt something he hadn't felt in the 3 years since losing his hearing. Pride. Not in himself, but in what they'd all built together. Silara found him in the crowd and signed, "You gave me a voice, let me give you something in return." She gestured to her children, to Anne, to the diverse crowd of beings celebrating together. "Family," she signed. "Not by blood, by choice, by understanding." David signed back, "Best gift I ever received." Whisper climbed onto his shoulder and rumbled contentedly. Around them, beings of a dozen species communicated in a dozen different ways, and somehow they all understood each other perfectly. 6 months passed and Station Omega-7 changed in ways nobody had expected. The communication barriers that had seemed impossible to cross were falling one by one. Silara and David had started something that spread like wildfire through the rehabilitation community. David no longer worked as a simple maintenance technician. Director Patricia had promoted him to Chief Communication Specialist. His job was to help develop systems for beings who couldn't use standard neural translators. He worked with engineers, linguists, and scientists from across the galaxy. Anne Brooks had become his assistant. She'd discovered a talent for learning new communication methods and was working on her degree in xenolinguistics. She could now sign in 4 different languages and was learning the color pattern communication of the Vrin. Silara's role had grown too. She was officially the station's guardian liaison. But everyone knew her real job was being there for beings who felt invisible. When someone arrived scared and unable to communicate, Silara was the first one called. Her presence alone seemed to calm even the most distressed beings. Her 7 children were thriving. They were the size of horses now, still young but growing fast. They'd become fixtures around the station. The 5 hearing hatchlings, Granite, Silver, Shadow, Crystal, and Blaze, worked as junior assistants in various departments. They were learning multiple skills and languages. The 2 deaf hatchlings, Whisper and Storm, stayed closest to David and Silara. They'd become symbols of something important. Proof that different didn't mean less capable. On this particular morning, David was teaching a class in Conference Room 3. 20 station personnel were learning advanced sign language. The room was diverse, humans mixed with aliens of various species. Everyone wanted to learn. Whisper sat beside David, demonstrating signs when needed. At 6 months old, she was already more fluent than most of the students. Her claws were dexterous and her signs were clear. Anne entered the room with a tablet. She signed, "Director Williams needs you, important visitors." David nodded and signed to the class. "Practice with Whisper. I will return soon." In Patricia's office, he found her meeting with 3 humans he didn't recognize. They wore formal Earth government uniforms. "David." Patricia signed and spoke simultaneously. She'd become fluent over the months. "These are representatives from the United Earth Council. They have a proposal." The eldest representative, a man named George Hendricks, stood and offered his hand. He signed as he spoke. "Pleased to meet you. Mr. Reyes, your work here has caught Earth's attention." David shook his hand and waited for more information. "Earth wants to create a new facility," George continued. "A place specifically designed for beings with non-standard communication needs. We want it to be a model for the entire galaxy, and we want you and Silara to lead it." David's eyes widened. He typed on his tablet. "Lead it? I am just a maintenance worker who learned to sign." "You're the person who saw value where trained professionals saw nothing," another representative said. "You changed galactic protocol for handling communication-disabled refugees. You've published 3 papers that are now required reading in xenolinguistics programs. You're exactly who we need." Patricia added, "The facility would be on Earth's moon, purpose-built, large enough for hundreds of beings. Silara and her children would have a permanent home there. You'd have resources you can't imagine here." David sat down heavily. He typed, "Why Earth? Why not a galactic facility?" "Because Earth has something to prove," George said honestly. "We're the newest members of the Galactic Council. Other species see us as primitive in some ways. But our history with disability rights, with inclusion, with finding multiple ways to communicate and contribute, that's something we can lead in." He pulled up images on a display screen. Beautiful architectural designs showing habitats for various species. Communication centers with technology David had only dreamed about. Educational facilities, medical research labs. "We're calling it the Lunar Communication Institute," George said. "A place where every being, regardless of how they communicate, can find their voice." David looked at Patricia. She signed, "It is your choice. But I think you should say yes. What about the station?" David typed. "Anne can take over your work here," Patricia signed. "She's ready. And we'll hire more specialists trained in your methods. What you started here will continue." David asked for time to think. He needed to talk to Silara. He found her in the habitat bay with her children. They were practicing hunting techniques. The hatchlings had gotten good at working together. deaf and hearing coordinating through a mix of signs and vocalizations. David signed, "Can we talk?" Silara immediately came over, leaving her children to practice. She signed something wrong? David explained the offer. Silara listened carefully, occasionally asking questions. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she signed, "What do you want to do?" David hadn't expected the question to be turned back on him. He typed, "I want to help more beings like us, but I am scared. This is big responsibility." Silara signed, 6 months ago I was in a cell, alone, hopeless. Now I have 7 children and purpose because one person saw me. You did that. I just recognized sign language," David typed. "No," Silara signed firmly. "You saw a person where others saw a dangerous animal. You listened when no one else would. That is what Earth needs you to teach others." Whisper and Storm came over, sensing something important was happening. They pressed against David's sides, offering silent support. "Are you willing to go to Earth?" David signed to Silara. Silara looked at her 7 children, then at David. She signed, "Home is not a place. Home is where you are understood, where you are valued. Earth offers that. Here offered that. I will go where we can help the most beings find home." David made his decision. 3 months later, the Lunar Communication Institute opened. The facility was everything Earth had promised and more. Habitats for species ranging from tiny to massive. Communication technology that could translate dozens of methods. Educational programs designed by beings who actually used those methods. Silara's habitat was the largest, with space for her children to fly and hunt and play. But she spent most of her time in the communication center, meeting with new arrivals who'd been told they could never integrate into galactic society. David had an office overlooking Earth. The planet hung in the lunar sky, blue and beautiful. His team had grown to 50 specialists from various species. Anne had come with him, unable to resist the opportunity. The Institute's first students were 12 beings from different worlds. Each had been classified as unable to communicate. Within weeks, all 12 were learning, growing, connecting. A Talarian named Riff, who communicated through scent, learned to use a chemical synthesizer that others could understand. A Vryn named Color, who used light patterns, was given projection equipment. A young human girl named Sophie, who'd been born without vocal cords, learned sign language and became friends with Whisper and Storm. One evening, David stood on the observation deck watching Earth rise. Silara joined him, moving quietly despite her size. She signed, "Do you miss the station?" David signed back, "Sometimes, but this is where we need to be." Silara's children flew past the windows, playing in the low lunar gravity. All 7 of them, hearing and deaf, working together perfectly. "My children will never know rejection," Silara signed. "Because of you," David signed, "because of us." "We did this together." A group of students walked past, chattering in a mix of signs, colors, scents, and sounds. Sophie was in the middle, signing rapidly with Whisper. They were planning something, probably another adventure that would give the staff heart attacks. "This is what I dreamed of," Silara signed. "When I was young and newly deaf, when they told me I had no future, I dreamed someone would see me, truly see me." David turned to look at her. She was magnificent in the earthlight, scales shimmering, wings slightly spread. "A mother, a guardian, a teacher, a friend, I see you," he signed. "I always will." Silara made the rumbling sound deep in her chest that meant contentment. Whisper and Storm landed beside them, breathless from flying. Storm signed, "Earth is beautiful. Why did humans leave it?" "To explore," David said aloud, knowing Storm would feel the vibrations. "To find others. To learn." Whisper signed, "To find us?" David smiled. He signed, "Yes, to find you." That night, the Institute held a ceremony. Representatives from 40 species attended. They were there to recognize the facility's official opening and to honor those who made it possible. George Hendricks gave a speech that was simultaneously spoken, signed, projected in colors, and distributed as scent patterns. Technology making sure everyone could understand. The Lunar Communication Institute represents humanity's belief that every intelligent being has value, George said. That communication is not limited to one method. That understanding can cross any barrier if we simply take the time to try. He presented awards to David and Silara, medals that meant official recognition from Earth's government. David accepted his and immediately felt uncomfortable with the attention. Silara seemed equally unsure about the ceremony. But then Sophie came forward. She was only 8 years old and had been at the Institute for 2 months. She signed, "Before here I was alone. People looked at me with pity. Now I have friends, now I have voice, thank you." Other students came forward with similar stories. The Talarian who'd been isolated for years because nobody had sent translation equipment. The Vryn who'd been sedated constantly because staff thought color flashing was aggression. A deaf Dreknari juvenile who'd been abandoned by his family and later found by Silara's children during an outreach mission. Each one had been overlooked, dismissed, considered broken. Each one was thriving now. David looked at Silara. She looked back at him. They didn't need to sign. They both understood what this moment meant. The galaxy was beginning to listen in new ways, beginning to see value in differences, beginning to understand that silence could speak volumes if someone just learned the language. Later, after the ceremony ended and the guests left, David sat in Silara's habitat with all 7 of her children. They'd become his family as much as hers. Whisper dozed in his lap. Storm leaned against his shoulder. The others sprawled around Silara in various states of sleepiness. Silara signed slowly, thoughtfully. "When I was in that cell, I wished for death. I saw no future, no hope. I was forgotten." David waited. He knew there was more. Now I have children, purpose, family, hope for others like us. All because one person stopped to watch me sign. She paused, then added, "Thank you for seeing the dragon everyone overlooked." David felt tears on his face. He signed back. "Thank you for teaching the broken human that different is not less." Whisper stirred and signed sleepily. "Not broken, just different." Storm added, "Different is good." The other 5 hatchlings, half asleep, rumbled their agreement. Outside the habitat, Earth turned slowly in the sky. On its surface, billions of beings lived and communicated in countless ways. On the moon, in a facility built with hope and determination, dozens of overlooked beings were learning that they had voices worth hearing. And in the center of it all, a deaf dragon mother and a deaf human veteran proved that the most powerful communication happened when someone simply chose to understand. They had been overlooked. They would make sure no one else was. Not ever again,